There we go, James. Bramacharya.
Yeah, so at the linguistic level, in Sanskrit, words can be taken back to their roots, but they can also then reach out in lots of different ways. Now, Bramacharya denotatively means to channel one's energy, to move in ways that are conducive to the experience of Brahman, totality, oneness. So to say that it means celibacy, it's a very particular rendering or understanding of the word. Now, in some contexts, it can mean that, but it doesn't mean it denotatively. Right. It means it connotatively. So in the Yoga Sutra, some words get used in very specific ways. Now, the way that Bramacharya is used, potentially after he introduces the term, he says this is part of the Mahavrata, the great vow to be observed all times and all places. Bramacharya is a word that is very prevalent in other places within the Indian culture, including the 4 stages of life, which is a very foundational idea. So the idea is the first stage of life is Bramacharya, the second stage is Grihastha, the third is Vanaprastha, and the fourth is Sannyasa. So the 4th stage of life, Sannyasa, is when you have renounced all worldly interests because you've done everything. So the idea is when you're a young person in the first, more or less, this is just roughly speaking, 25 years of life, you are dedicated to studentship. Your job is to learn. So for example, it's not that one has a part-time job. It's one's job is to be a student. So when people go to a Gurukula, like one of my Sanskrit teachers, literally they study all the time. 4 a.m. to 10 p.m. it's on. But not in a kind of cramming it in a way. It's like there's the flow of the day. So you get up, you do your meditation, you do the morning recitation, you do the rituals, you do the morning practices, you have breakfast, and then you go into various types of learning experience, which can be the older students will help the younger students. There'll be time with the master, the guru, sitting under the tree or sitting in the classroom, whatever it might be. There'll be structured time when you're exploring different particular aspects of the Vedic arts and sciences, and that will become more and more, let's say, focused as you become older. But when you're very young, you're just learning the building blocks, including in the very traditional setting. By the time you're age 12, you'll already have by heart 3,000 plus Sanskrit verses, which is basically the vocabulary of Sanskrit. Like you've got the Lexicon Thesaurus Dictionary online, installed in the fiber of your being, and all the declensions of nouns and all the conjugations of verbs, you know them. So then when you go into texts, you're grammatically, linguistically equipped to navigate them. You're also trained in the basics of logic and epistemology when you're a child, by the time you're 12. So then when you start to go into Shastras, when you start to go into literature, into text, into areas of study like yoga or logic, and perhaps for some people Vedanta maybe, or you start to go into different arts and sciences, you've got the basic equipment of grammatical linguistic understanding. You've got the basic equipment of how to navigate language. So you understand logic and epistemology, how we determine if something is real or not. And with that basic foundation, then you go into the texts. Now, or if you say you're apprenticing something, you're learning a trade, your job is to learn. And the idea is you don't have family responsibilities at this time. Your responsibility is to equip yourself to become properly established in the principles that help you learn through your life. So by the time you enter the realm of having societal responsibility, you already have a very thorough understanding of the time-tested principles that have been proven to work and the pitfalls that one needs to be aware of because of all this multi-generational wisdom. Then when one enters Grihastha, this is the time of life. You've got your energy is full. You haven't dispersed, like say, for example, the person who is aflame for knowledge and God at age 14, 15, 18, who then meets the member of the opposite sex and gets fully, like, what happens to your energy? It all starts to get, the focus on all of that knowledge disperses. Yeah. So traditionally, and also at that age, it can be very intoxicating. So the idea is, traditionally, during that time, one practices Bramacharya, but that isn't necessarily particularly suppressive, because also for a boy, for example, from age of 7, long before puberty sets in, the child will have been taught the mechanisms to circulate creative and then what will become sexual energy in the body. So by the time that those transformations happen in the male anatomy, the child is already equipped with all of the technical, physiological, kinesthetic understanding of how to circulate that energy, to use it constructively without having to throw the seed around. Now imagine a person who does that. Now in the culture that we grew up in, this is very hard to imagine, but when I was 18, when I was 16, I was just interested in girls and basketball. That's what I was talking about with my friends. That's what I was spending all my energy on. I really liked sports, and that was great for me. It gave me an outlet for a lot of energy. But when I went to live in Asia, I met teenagers who behaved very differently from what I had grown up in. And I realized, oh, this is not as universal as I'd imagined. This is cultural. When I was teaching in the school in Thailand, for example, and I was coaching basketball, the kids were just not, they were nowhere near, they were not competitive. They learned to be competitive, but they were just, the way they would play was just different, very different from what I had known. It's a different mindset, it's a different reality. It's steeped in a very different understanding of life. And then when I was studying in India at the Gurukula, I met these teenagers who were just, they were very content. They were very serene. They were very happy in this mode of life that wasn't about girls and sports and entertainment and all of that. They were really immersed in it. And so the cultural setting was promoting working with the naturally expansive energy of the teenage years in a way that was channeling it differently.
Right. And from what you're saying is, sorry, James, from what you're saying there as well, they didn't perceive that it was a suppression or a withdrawal or a containment, like all of the kind of language around how we find Bramacharya and a lot of the texts and translations that we're reading. So their lived experience is very, very different.
Yeah, I mean, it's not to say there isn't suppression and repression, all of that in the Indian culture. That's definitely there. But, you know, the land that we now refer to as India has been also subject to all sorts of external influences that are not necessarily part of what people would call Indic culture, because the invasions of various peoples over the years, including, of course, in recent centuries, the influence of the British and all our mindset, which certainly included during the time of the initial prevalence of the East India Company, all of that suppression, repression, and things being forbidden. But just to come back to the idea of, so Bramacharya is the term for the first stage of life in which one's duty, the whole point of that stage of life, is to become as empowered as possible by developing all the facets of one's intelligence. And if in youth, there's ancient Indian texts about this, and from many in literature, and also it's like, if in youth you get fixated on the sensual things, it will stunt your growth in a certain way. Because if all of a sudden you start to throw out all that creative potential, it's not going to be used to create this massive expansion of your intellect that can, I don't just mean intellect in terms of like being brainy and clever. I mean all the development of your intelligences. So the idea is, if you allow the human being to grow, this will naturally emerge. But then when you enter the householder life, you're ready to savor it and enjoy it because you've got some foundations. So one thing that I notice in the world today, for example, is a lot of people really, it's strange for me because there's things I've just been doing all my life in the realm of movement and physical health. But there's lots of people who are adults now who really don't have a vocabulary of how to look after their physical well-being. If they feel back pain, they don't have 100 different options of things they could try to alleviate it. Whereas for me, it's just completely normal, like because all my life I've been involved in sports and conditioning and training, and then learning about yogasana and the principles of yoga. But a lot of people just don't have that. So there's many things in the modern world that we're just missing, that in a more, let's say, a more balanced way of life, we would all have learned those skills. So this is one of the ideas of the Bramacharya. It's like you dedicate that first portion of life when there is this biological support for incredibly fast learning. And this is the other thing that, our education system in the West, it's so tragic because it disables people. It makes people stupid. You know, there's that famous study, like you assess children how intelligent they are at age 5 or something, and they're almost all geniuses. And then it just goes down and down and down. By the time they leave school, it's like 2 or 3% are still geniuses. I see 2, 3-year-olds, they can get up off the ground without using their hands. They've got toys in both hands. They can get up and they can roll around. 15, 16-year-olds, they can no longer get up and down off the ground without using their hands. What has gone wrong? And then the thinking, you've got to tick this box, you've got to be able to pass this exam. And education is so narrow in its focus. It doesn't develop the intelligence. It doesn't develop the sense of taste, smell, sight, touch. It doesn't teach people to move. And when people don't know how to move, they're disconnected from the intelligence of the body, and so they become fearful and reliant on these very reductive, damaging medical models, which don't actually harness the life force. So anyway, this is a lot. Yeah, I'm just been an ninja. I'm full of inspiration. So anyway,
pouring out of you, James.
But coming back to the point, Bramacharya means this the period of life when you're learning how to channel one's life force, so you can actually experience more Brahman, more totality, more oneness, more harmony in your life. And then you enter the realm of Grihastha when you're in your 20s, let's say, or from the late teens to sometime in your 20s, you enter the householder realm and you have children. Why? Because biologically, you've got this massive overflow of energy. So you've got all these resources available. And if you've done that Bramacharya section of life really well, you've got a lot of wisdom, you've got a lot of knowledge you can put into practice and learn as you keep growing, because you've learned to learn in that Bramacharya period of life. And then you embrace all the pleasures, all of the ups, downs, challenges of life, and you do it fully. And so you save a life. And your responsibility as a Grihastha, you are generating the next generation, and you are supporting society, you're moving things forward. Once your children grow up, and they start to have children, then you become a grandparent, and you move into what's called vanaprastha. So you start to move outside the town. You start to live at one remove from society. You're still involved in society. You're still actively engaging with the different generations, but you're no longer leading things forwards. You're stepping back. You're in the more advisory role because your energy is moving in a different direction now. And then once your grandchildren are grown, you've seen all the flavors of life. Your job's done. It's time for you to, all your worldly responsibilities now. So you've been a learner, you've been a parent, and even if you don't become a parent, you've been in that active phase of life, you've been contributing to society, then you've been passing on your wisdom, you've been helping steward, you've been appreciating the new insights, the new generation. But there's not this kind of separation between the generations. There's like three generations are living in that interplay. But once your grandchildren have grown up, to adulthood, then it's time for you. You've done everything. And then so naturally then there is the readiness to renounce and prepare to leave life lightly, not clinging to the things and not having these unresolved desires, because at every stage of life you've lived it to the hilt. So that's Bramacharya. Now, connotatively, when one is in a Gurukula, one is celibate. You're not going out with the opposite sex. You're just dedicated to study. So when you're in that early stage of life, celibacy is a strong associated meaning. It's like it's understood that as soon as you enter the realm of sexual intimacy, it's going to have a very significant impact on the way your energy moves. So if you have been a student and you're equipping yourself with all this, like, let's say, overview of principles to help you navigate the challenges of life, as soon as you enter the realm of intimacy, then the practical application of that's going to move to the fore. And as soon as it does, the opportunity to keep learning the theory is going to be significantly reduced, because you're going to have your hands full once you've got children around.
Yes. And
once you've got children, I mean, this is the other thing, but say, oh, now we don't have to have children, whatever, it's not the same. Okay, fair enough. But nonetheless, energetically, it's very impactful. So for me, if you take it to the roots, now, there are a lot of people who've got a very partial or a view of some of the teachings that's very significantly shaped by the way it was taught to them. And there are people who have been taught, oh, you need to be celibate or whatever. Like, just like you see this in religious institutions all over the world. There's all sorts of suppression, repression. But what's that about? That's because people haven't really understood the deeper underlying truths, and they don't. What's motivating that? Oftentimes, it's fear. So, I would just, from my perspective and my understanding linguistically, and in this context of the Yoga Sutra, to say that Bramacharya means celibacy is inaccurate. However, that's not to say that celibacy or continency or very judicious observation, deployment, respect of the sexual energy is not an intrinsic part of the practice of Bramacharya. But also in very traditional contexts, it is said the married couple, the committed life partners, the committed couple who are living together and enjoying their sexual relations in a nurturing, respectful way, they're just as much brahmacharyas as the renunciate who's living in is what you do with that sexual energy. So Patanjali, one of the things that's very beautiful about Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is the way it meshes into all these other means or systems or ways of practicing. So there are many lineage, like in the tantric lineages. Tantra is a word, again, people have all sorts of misconceptions, but one way we can think of Tantra very practically is it is a way of engaging with life that recognizes that everything is divine, everything is sacred, everything is the means, everything that we have access to is part of, there's nowhere God is not, everything is consciousness. So when we're working with sexual energy, this is very powerful energy, so let's harness it for the sake of yoga. So the best way to do that, and in traditional, there's obviously many traditions, but generally speaking, in the tantric lineages that I've been exposed to, there's the idea of those practices that harness sexual energy. They're intended for people who are deeply, deeply committed. And because you're undertaking a sadhana together. So the whole point of a sadhana, a committed practice to move towards greater understanding and freedom, is you undertake it until it brings you to that point that you're aiming for. So in what's sometimes called yugala sadhana, the sadhana of a couple, the context is marriage and lifelong commitment. And so it's recognizing there is this beautiful potential that humans have to use sexual intimacy within the context of a relationship that's based on mutual confidence and in the sense of trust or faithfulness. And in that type of context, then you can harness this to do amazing things. And you can use each other's water to cleanse each other's earth. You can use each other's air to cleanse each other's fire, and all of this. And it becomes this very beautiful dance, this is the whole play of yoga, the play of the different pairs of opposites. And when one looks into tantric teachings, there's nothing that needs to be rejected in Patanjali. The underlying framework of Patanjali is recognized as being very helpful by those lineages. Even if it's not overtly stated, it's just understood. Like, for example, in Hatha Yoga, sometimes they talk about having 6 limbs. And some people think, oh, this is superior to the 8 limbs. No, they don't mention yama niyama asana because they take it for granted that one is already established in that. So they take it for granted that if one is going to start playing with the sexual energy, one's established in Bramacharya. One is established in the principles of respectfully using one's energy, including the sexual energy.
James, I think that's a perfect place to put a full stop on that conversation, because clearly we could go on for the entire day.
Yes.
But we're going to stop that there.
Yeah.
Thank you.